All right, welcome to another episode of MDTV. We're still on the coronavirus. Surprise, surprise. So let's get right into it. My goals for today are really to help mitigate some of the fear while also ensuring the utmost truth that I can say about the virus and kind of the status that we're at today. So let's get in this. No death is good, but I want people to note just some of the trends that we see here, and especially the panic in the younger age group that is people that are less than 50. We really don't have that much to fear in regards to death from this if you're under 50 and you're healthy. Okay, of course, these numbers are saying 0.2%, which is 2 out of 1,000 people. But those numbers are not keeping me personally awake at night. Now, that is to say that it's still very significant in the older populations. And, I want to say this with a grain of salt because we don't have enough data to make super educated conclusions about the exact death rate and who is most likely to die and all of that. But what we do know for sure is that this virus definitely disproportionately affects the elderly in terms of death rates. And so, first thing is, I just kind of like to simplify things and make things very clear to understand. So I just like to round this up to about 2% in the 50 to 59 group. This is about 4%, this is 8%, and this is about 16%. So you could see that as you increase your age per decade, there's about a doubling in the likelihood that you will succumb to the virus. Okay, so that's one. Now, I want to talk about the infectivity of the coronavirus, or how infectious it is, how contagious it is. All right, same thing. So these numbers can also be taken with a grain of salt, but this just puts things in relative terms. Okay, so the important things to note here is that when we're looking at things like measles, mumps, and so on, we have to understand that these viruses are actually much more contagious. Meaning, if you have one person in a room with 100 people, for simplicity measures, we'll just say 18 people will contract the virus if the person's infected with measles and no one's vaccinated, of course, right? So measles is super infectious, whereas the influenza virus, as well as our dear friend COVID, these are significantly lower. Now, it's not to say that this virus is very contagious, because it is extremely contagious, but I just want to put things into relative terms, that there are many other viruses out there that are actually much more contagious than this, and good thing we have vaccines to help mitigate this problem. One caveat to this graph, though, is that I have read and heard from various sources that the COVID-19 is actually more contagious than the influenza virus. So this number could be, I don't know, anywhere from 2 to 4 or something like that. But even still, it helps put things into perspective of how contagious is this and how does it spread. Okay. And another point I'd like to make here is that I like to tell people that when you're understanding the coronavirus, then just think of it as a variant to influenza. And why do I say that? Well, I say that because the virus acts very similarly to influenza. As we can see here, it's sort of similar in how contagious it is. It's similar in how it affects the human. It's similar in how it kills the human, and so on down the line. And namely, the symptomology of the virus is very similar. So it's going to be a flu-like illness. The symptoms to look out for are fever, number one, and then cough, shortness of breath, muscle aches, so on and so forth. Okay. And I'll say that the number one symptom to look out for, number one, is going to be fever, because it's estimated around 98% of patients have fever when infected with this virus. So if you do get cold-like symptoms, it's okay to be cautious, but just don't freak out because most patients uh, will end up having a fever if they are symptomatic, of course. Okay, that does not include the asymptomatic individuals. And this graph is now showing us how deadly the disease is. Okay, so deadliness of a disease is defined by what percentage of people that are infected will actually ultimately end up dying from the virus. Okay, you can see Ebola is extremely deadly, right? Um, with, I guess, almost half of the patients contracting Ebola will ultimately succumb, whereas the lower estimates of COVID-19, I think we're going to see around 1% or less. We discussed that in other videos. So again, the point here is to put this into relative terms and don't focus so much on the individualized numbers, but just understand that the deadliness of a disease is on a spectrum, and it's one way we can utilize the analysis of the problem at hand. Okay, so just to put these numbers out there to make a little bit more sense, so seasonal flu, 0.1%, which means 1 in 1,000 patients who get the seasonal flu will die. Measles, this is in the US, of course, because we're all vaccinated. 2, most of us, out of 1,000 will die getting measles in the US, whereas the lower estimate of corona is 10 out of 1,000, and then Ebola is going to be 500 out of 1,000 plus. All right, let's move on. Finally, to put this virus into relative terms, I want to shift our focus to a lovely Wikipedia table here and just go to show you that there have been many viruses and outbreaks and pandemics in the past, from the flu virus as well as the coronavirus, namely SARS and MERS. So we can analyze previous pandemics and utilize that data to best make predictions about the future. So I'm going to actually go into this in further detail in our next video. Stay tuned.